Please, that man is not our dad. The whisper hits Robert Stoica mid-sip, freezing the coffee halfway to his lips. Two soaked identical twins slide into his booth, clutching his arm like he's their last chance while behind them. A man in a gray coat steps through the cafe door and begins scanning the room. And when his eyes lock onto the girls, Robert realizes the hunter isn't just looking for them, he's ready to kill anyone who gets in his way. If this story pulled you in, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss what's ahead. I've got another unforgettable story coming tomorrow. And while you're here, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing people tuned in from all over the world. Okay, let's get back into it. The rain came in sideways. It pressed against the cafe windows like something desperate trying to get inside, streaking the glass in long, crooked lines that blurred the street beyond into nothing but gray and amber smears of light. November in this city was never gentle. It arrived like a warning cold, relentless, indifferent to anyone caught out in it without shelter. Robert Stoica had shelter. He always did. The booth near the far window was his by unspoken law. No one sat there when he arrived. No one lingered near it. The cafe staff had learned this the way people learned most important things, not from being told, but from watching carefully and deciding that some rules were better left unquestioned. The waitress with the red hair, Petra, he knew her name. He knew all their names, had already set his cup down before he'd even removed his jacket. Black coffee. No sugar. The cup small and dark against his tattooed hands. Robert Stoica was not a large man in the way that announced itself loudly. He was the other kind of large, the kind you felt before you understood it. Lean, sharp-jawed, with the kind of stillness that belonged to men who had survived rooms where stillness was the difference between living and not. His black shirt was open at the collar, no tie, the jacket draped over the booth beside him. Ink crept up his neck in dark, deliberate patterns, old work, done when he was younger and angrier, though some would argue the anger hadn't gone anywhere, only deepened into something quieter and therefore more dangerous. His eyes were the color of river water in winter. They moved slowly. They missed nothing. He lifted the cup and watched the rain. This was the part of his day he protected most fiercely. Not the meetings, not the territory negotiations, or the phone calls, or the particular brand of controlled chaos that constituted his professional life. This, 40 minutes in a booth with black coffee and the sound of rain against glass. The cafe smelled of espresso and warm bread and something faintly sweet from the pastry case near the counter. The ambient noise murmured conversations. The hiss of the machine behind the bar, the soft scrape of chairs formed a kind of white noise that his mind could rest inside. Petra passed his table with a small nod. He returned it. A man, 2 booths over, glanced at him, recognized something in his face, and quickly looked back at his newspaper. Robert took another sip. Across the room, near the entrance, a figure in a gray coat and wide-brimmed hat stood half inside the doorway, shaking rain from his sleeve before stepping fully in. Robert noted him the way he noted everything filed, categorized, deemed unthreatening, and returned his gaze to the window. He heard the door again, then he felt them, not saw, felt. The rush of cold air. The sound of small feet hitting the hardwood floor with the particular urgency of someone who has been running and has not yet decided to stop. 2 impacts against the booth cushion, one on either side of him, so simultaneous they might have been choreographed. 2 small bodies, warm despite the cold they carried in with them, trembling. Robert did not move. He lowered the cup to its saucer with a slowness that was entirely deliberate. The girl on his left yellow jacket, soaked through, one braid completely undone and plastered against her cheek, pressed so close her lips nearly brushed his ear. Her breathing was ragged. She had been running hard, and for long enough that her lungs hadn't caught up yet. When she spoke, her voice was so small it should not have reached him over the noise of the cafe. It reached him. Please, that man is not our dad. Robert Stoica went still, not the stillness of calm. The other kind. The kind that precedes something. He turned his head slowly, the way a man turns when he is controlling every signal his body sends, and looked at the girl on his right. She was identical to the first in the way that briefly disorients. Same face, same dark braids, same wide set of the eyes. She wore a burgundy jacket, darker with rain across the shoulders, a dark scarf bunched at her throat. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the cafe entrance. Her fingers had found his forearm, his right forearm, the one with the anchor inked across the back of the hand and wrapped around it, not asking, not pleading, simply holding, with the absolute conviction of someone who had made a decision and was no longer second-guessing it. Robert followed her gaze. The man in the gray coat was no longer near the entrance. He was inside, standing at the edge of the seating area, scanning the room with the slow, methodical patience of a man who did this professionally. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't calling out. He moved his eyes across the cafe the way you sweep a room before you clear it table by table, booth by booth. Robert knew that kind of search. He had ordered it performed on other people. His right hand moved beneath the table. Unhurried, silent, his fingers settled against the textured grip of the pistol, holstered against his ribs. He did not draw it. He rested his hand there the way a musician rests a hand on an instrument before the performance begins. Present, ready, already knowing the notes. The girl in yellow pressed closer. Her voice came again, barely a sound at all, warm against his ear despite everything. Please don't let him take us. Robert looked at the man in the gray coat, then at the small hand wrapped around his tattooed forearm, then back at the door, where the cold November rain continued its assault on the glass. He picked up his coffee with his left hand, took one slow, measured sip, set it down. His voice, when it came, was low enough that only the two girls could hear it. It carried no drama, no reassurance, only the flat, unambiguous weight of a man who had long ago stopped making promises he didn't intend to keep. Stay close. Don't move unless I move, and don't make a sound. The girl in burgundy exhaled one small, shaking breath and tightened her grip on his arm. Outside, the rain hammered the glass. Inside, the cafe continued its ordinary noise, entirely unaware that something had just quietly shifted in the booth by the window. Robert Stoica had come here for coffee and 40 minutes of silence. He understood now, with the cold certainty of a man who had learned to read the shape of trouble, that he was going to get neither. He came in like he owned the air around him. That was the first thing Robert noticed. Not the coat, not the height, not the careful way the man's eyes moved across the room. It was the ownership, the absolute, unquestioned certainty in every step that the thing he had come for was still here, still waiting, still his to collect. Robert had walked into rooms that same way. He didn't like seeing it on someone else. The man Patrick, though Robert didn't know his name yet, would learn it soon enough, was tall in the angular way that made suits look architectural. The gray coat was good quality, expensive without being showy. His face was long, composed, carrying the practiced blankness of a man who had trained himself never to reveal cost before negotiation. Dark hair, close cut, a jaw that hadn't softened with age. He was perhaps 45, perhaps older, wearing it the way certain men wore danger like it agreed with him. He stopped near the edge of the seating area. His eyes found the booth, found the twins. Something moved across his face, not relief, not the frantic gratitude of a father locating missing children. It was the other thing, the thing Robert had seen on the faces of men who had located missing property. A brief, cold settling, inventory confirmed. Robert watched all of this and kept his expression completely empty. Patrick approached the booth slowly, deliberately, each step announcing that he was a reasonable man, arriving at a reasonable situation. He stopped at the table's edge and looked down at the girls first, a long look, the kind meant to communicate authority without words, before lifting his eyes to Robert. He smiled. It was an impressive smile. Warm on the surface, structured underneath. "I'm sorry about this." His voice was measured, apologetic, the voice of a man who had rehearsed reasonable. "My daughters have a habit of running off when they're upset. I hope they haven't disturbed you." Robert said nothing. He held the man's gaze the way you hold a door shut against something pushing from the other side without visible effort, and without any intention of letting go. Patrick's smile held. "Girls, come on, let's go home." Neither girl moved. Lola's fingers tightened on Robert's forearm. Lily pressed closer to his side, her shoulder blade sharp against his arm, her breathing gone shallow and rapid in the way breathing goes when the body is managing terror and trying not to show it. Robert felt both of these things clearly. He reached for his coffee, took a sip, set it down. Then, with the unhurried calm of a man who had nowhere urgent to be and found the current situation only mildly interesting, he looked up at Patrick and said, "They don't seem like they want to go." A beat. Something shifted behind Patrick's eyes. Not anger. He was too controlled for visible anger. A recalibration. He was reassessing the man in front of him, updating his read, deciding how much force the situation required. Children don't always want what's good for them. Still smooth, still reasonable. "I'm sure you understand." "I understand a lot of things," Robert said. He let the silence sit there between them like a third person at the table. Then he turned to the girl pressed against his left side, Lily. Her braid was still damp, beginning to dry at the edges into soft, fraying pieces around her face. Her eyes were fixed on the table. He looked at her the way he had once learned to look at frightened animals directly, but without pressure, without demand. "Do you know this man?" he asked quietly. Lily lifted her eyes. They were dark, enormous, carrying the particular exhaustion of a child who has been afraid for long enough that fear has become the background against which everything else happens. She looked at Patrick, then back at Robert, and she shook her head. One small definitive motion. No, something Robert hadn't planned on moved through his chest. He didn't examine it. He filed it for later, and returned his attention to the man across the table. Patrick's composure had developed the first hairline fracture. It was small, a tightening at the corner of his jaw, a fraction of adjustment in his posture. But Robert was a man who had spent 15 years reading fractures in other men's composure for a living. "I think," Robert said, conversationally, "the way you discuss weather, that you should sit down." "I don't think that's—" I wasn't asking. The cafe noise continued around them. Cups meeting saucers, the machine behind the bar, a murmured conversation near the window. None of it touched the booth. The booth existed in its own atmosphere now, pressurized and still. Patrick sat. He did it slowly, with great deliberateness, the way men sit when they are telling themselves they have chosen to sit rather than been told to. He settled across from Robert and folded his hands on the table and looked at him with eyes that had gone flat and professional. "You don't know what you're involving yourself in," Patrick said. "Tell me," Robert said. "These children belong with their father. Whatever they've said to you, their father." Robert repeated it with no inflection whatsoever. "Just the words," returned, like something set back on a shelf. Lily made a small sound beside him. Involuntary. The kind of sound that escapes before you can stop it. Robert didn't look at her, but he felt Lola's grip on his arm shift tighter now, trembling slightly. He kept his eyes on Patrick. "Their father," he said again, slower this time, watching the man's face with the patience of someone who already suspects the answer and is simply waiting for the lie to arrange itself, would know which one is which. Patrick's jaw moved once, and in the silence that followed, in the half-second before Patrick rebuilt his expression back into something controlled and plausible, Robert saw everything he needed to see. He had spent 15 years watching men decide whether to run or bluff. This man was going to bluff. Which meant Robert now knew two things with absolute certainty. The girls were telling the truth, and whoever was sitting across from him was very, very far from finished. Outside, the rain pressed harder against the glass. Robert settled back in the booth, unhurried, his right hand still resting quietly beneath the table. He had time. He was in no rush at all. Patrick excused himself. He did it politely, smoothly, with the practiced grace of a man who understood that a tactical retreat was not the same as a defeat. He had received a phone call, or pretended to. The performance was convincing enough. He stood, buttoned his coat, told Robert with a thin smile that they would continue this conversation shortly, and walked toward the far end of the cafe near the restrooms, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes never fully leaving the booth. Buying time, Robert watched him go. Then he looked down at the two girls, still pressed against either side of him, and said, very quietly, "You have about 3 minutes to tell me something true." Lily spoke first. She was the bolder one. Robert had already established this, catalogued it the way he catalogued everything useful. Lily pressed, pushed, initiated. Lola absorbed, watched, gripped. Two identical faces housing entirely different engines. Lily looked up at him with those dark, exhausted eyes and said, "We've seen you before." Robert waited. "Here, at this cafe." She glanced around briefly, as though confirming the room matched her memory. "We used to come with our mom, every Saturday. She likes the table near the counter because the heater is closest there." A pause. Liked. She used to like it. The tense shift landed quietly. Robert noted it without reacting. "We saw you every time," Lily continued. "Always in this booth, always alone, always the same coffee." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, the memory of one. "Mom told us not to look at you. She said men like you were dangerous and we should pretend you weren't there." "Smart woman," Robert said. "She is," Lola said from his right. First words she'd spoken directly to him. Her voice was softer than her sister's, more careful, like someone who had learned that words had weight and chose them accordingly. "She's very smart," present tense, both of them, present tense, when talking about their mother. Robert registered this with something that wasn't quite relief. But we looked anyway, Lily admitted. We're good at pretending to look somewhere else while actually looking somewhere else. Mom never noticed. What did you see? Robert asked. Lily hesitated. Then, the first time, you made the waitress, the one with the red hair, you made her drop an entire tray of cups. You said something to her and she jumped, and everything fell and crashed everywhere, and she looked like she wanted to disappear. Robert remembered. He had not been in a good mood that particular Saturday. Then, Lily continued, and now there was something careful and deliberate in her voice, the tone of a child presenting evidence they have organized in advance. You got up, and you helped her pick everything up, every single piece. And when you thought nobody was watching, you said something that made her laugh. Robert said nothing. You did it again 2 weeks later, Lily said. You made a face at us when Mom turned around. A ridiculous face. Like, she demonstrated briefly, distorting her features into something so absurd that Lola made a small strangled sound beside him that was almost a laugh. Robert kept his expression neutral, with considerable effort. And the time the old man at the counter couldn't pay, Lola said quietly. You were already leaving. You stopped. You said something to Petra, and then you walked out, and we watched Petra tell the man his coffee was already paid for, and he didn't know who had done it. Silence. Robert looked at the table. His jaw worked once. You think because of that, he said carefully, that I'm someone who helps people. No, Lily said. He looked at her. We think, she said, with the devastating precision of a child who has had a long time to think something through, that you're someone who helps people when nobody is watching. Which is different. She held his gaze steadily. The men who hurt people when nobody is watching are the most dangerous kind. But maybe the opposite is also true. Robert Stoica, who had not been rendered briefly speechless by another human being in longer than he could accurately recall, said nothing for a full 4 seconds. Then, how old are you? 9, Lily said. 9, he repeated. And 3/4, Lola added. Robert looked across the cafe. Patrick was still at the far end, phone to his ear, watching the booth with the patience of a man who believed patience was the same as power. He turned back to the girls. Your mother, he said. Tell me. The small warmth that had briefly entered the booth, the almost laugh, the almost smile drained out of it cleanly. Lily's hands, resting on the table, folded together the way hands fold when their owner is preparing to carry something heavy. Our real dad disappeared 4 months ago, she said. He owed money. A lot of money. To Patrick. She said the name with a flatness that conveyed precisely what she thought of it. Patrick came to our apartment first asking for it. Mom told him she didn't have it. He came back. Then he came back again. She swallowed. The last time he came back, he didn't leave. Lola stared at the table. He said he was keeping Mom until the debt was paid, Lily continued. He made her call Dad's number every day, but Dad never answered. Then Patrick stopped making her call. A pause so brief, it was almost not a pause. I think he stopped believing Dad was coming back. So he made a new plan, Robert said. Lily looked at him. You already know, she said. It wasn't a question. Tell me anyway. He said we were worth more than the debt. Her voice didn't break. It flattened instead the way a voice goes flat when the only alternative is to fall apart, and falling apart is not currently an option. He was going to sell us. He had people. People who moved children across borders. She looked at Robert with eyes that were 9 years old, and somehow much, much older. We heard him talking on the phone. That's when we ran. The cafe noise continued its indifferent hum around them. Robert looked at Patrick across the room. Patrick looked back. Beneath the table, Robert's hand rested against the grip of his pistol. Still, steady, patient. Something old moved through his chest. Something he had spent considerable effort burying. It rose anyway. Robert had a rule. It was not a rule he had written down or spoken aloud or explained to anyone in his organization. It existed the way certain convictions exist in men who have lived long enough in darkness to understand precisely where they will not go wordlessly, absolutely, without negotiation. He did not touch children. He did not permit it. Not in his territory, not through his networks, not by anyone who wanted to continue existing within his orbit. In 15 years of building an empire on the kind of work that decent people preferred not to know about, this line had never moved. Men who crossed it had learned, often briefly, what that meant. He sat in the booth now with 2 9-year-old girls pressed against either side of him. And he felt that line, felt it the way you feel a bone before it breaks, the pressure building underneath the surface, and he breathed through it slowly. "The phone call," he said. "The one you heard. How much did you understand?" Lily's fingers tightened against each other on the table. "Enough," she said. "Tell me what you heard. Exactly. Not what you think it meant. What you actually heard." She nodded once, the serious nod of a child taking instructions seriously. She closed her eyes briefly, retrieving, ordering, and then opened them. "He said the cargo was ready. He said 2 units, matching, undocumented." Her voice carried the words carefully, like someone transporting something fragile. "He said the border window was Thursday. He said the price covered the full amount, plus interest." She paused. Then he laughed, and he said, "I remember this exactly because it made my stomach hurt," he said. "Twins always command a premium." The cafe continued around them. A cup meeting a saucer. Someone's quiet laughter near the door. The rain. Robert's expression did not change. Inside his chest, behind 15 years of discipline and controlled stillness, and the careful management of every signal his body sent to the world, something ignited, clean and cold and absolute. He looked at Lola. She was staring at the table. She had been staring at it since her sister began speaking, and Robert understood this, understood that Lola had heard these words before, had already processed them, had already been through whatever a 9-year-old goes through when she understands that someone has assigned her a price. She was not re-experiencing it. She was simply enduring the fact of it existing in the air again. He looked back at Lily. "Your father," he said, before he disappeared. "What do you know about what he owed?" Lily's mouth pressed together. "Dad borrowed money. A lot. He had a business that went wrong. He thought he could fix it before Patrick found out how bad it was." She exhaled. "He couldn't." "How long ago?" "The business started failing about a year ago. Patrick came for the first time in the summer. Dad kept promising to pay." She looked at her hands. "Then in July, Dad didn't come home one night. Mom called everyone. Nobody knew anything." A pause. "Patrick came 3 days later. He said Dad had run, that he'd left us to deal with his debt alone." "Do you believe that?" Robert asked. Lily looked at him steadily. "No. Why not?" "Because Dad coached our football team." She said it simply, without decoration. "He came to every practice in the rain. He learned both our positions, even though they're different. He made us matching water bottles with our names on them." She swallowed once. "Men who make matching water bottles don't just leave." Robert said nothing. Beside him, Lola made a small sound, barely anything, the compression of breath that precedes tears that a person has decided not to shed. She pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth, and then lowered it and continued staring at the table. Robert looked across the cafe. Patrick had finished his phone call. He was standing at the far end of the room, coat still buttoned, watching the booth with the flat patience he'd maintained throughout. He hadn't moved toward the exit. He wasn't planning to leave without what he came for. Robert studied him. He was calculating. Robert understood. Deciding how much the presence of a dangerous man in a cafe booth changed his timeline. Deciding whether Robert was simply an obstacle or a genuine complication. Deciding, most importantly, whether the man with the neck tattoos and the cold eyes was someone who would ultimately step aside once the social inconvenience of the situation was properly pressured. Patrick had made a significant error in his calculations. "Your mother," Robert said, returning to the girls. "Where is she being held?" Lily blinked. The question seemed to reorient her. She had not expected it. Or not expected it yet. Not expected the conversation to move from what happened to what now, with such directness. "A building," she said, "near the water. We drove past it once when Patrick was taking us somewhere he didn't know we were paying attention. There are cranes, orange ones, and a blue warehouse with a broken sign." "How many men did you see there?" "4, Lola said quietly, still looking at the table. "Maybe 5. One stays outside the room where Mom is. Patrick has 2 others that go with him everywhere." She paused. "The ones outside." Robert glanced toward the cafe entrance. 2 men in gray coats stood on the pavement beyond the glass, rain running off their shoulders, watching the door. They had been there since Patrick entered. Robert had counted them 12 minutes ago. He looked back at Patrick. Patrick looked back at him with the expression of a man who believed the numbers were in his favor. They weren't, but that particular correction could wait. "Listen to me," Robert said, and something in his voice, some shift in register, quiet and unambiguous, made both girls look up at him simultaneously. I'm going to stand up in a moment and speak to that man. While I do that, I need you to stay in this booth and not move. Can you do that?" Lily nodded immediately. Lola's eyes searched his face for a moment, reading him the way she had clearly learned to read adults, searching for the gap between what was said and what was meant. Whatever she found, it seemed to satisfy her. She nodded. "One more thing," Robert said. They waited. "Your mother." He kept his voice level, stripped of everything except the information itself. "She's alive. Men like Patrick don't discard leverage." He held their eyes. "She's alive and she's waiting for you. Hold on to that." Lola's composure cracked just slightly, just at the edges, a brightness gathering in her eyes that she immediately worked to contain. Lily reached across Robert's lap and took her sister's hand. Robert watched this for exactly 1 second. Then he placed both tattooed hands flat on the table and stood up. Robert buttoned his jacket, one button, slowly. The way a man buttons a jacket when he is not in a hurry, because he has already decided how everything in the next 4 minutes is going to go, and the timeline belongs entirely to him. He stepped out of the booth. The cafe continued its noise around him. Cups, conversation, the machine behind the bar, and then, gradually, it didn't. Not all at once. The way sound dies in a room is always gradual, person by person, table by table, as something in the atmosphere communicates itself without words, and people look up from their coffee and their phones and their quiet afternoon conversations and understand, instinctively, that the nature of the room has changed. Robert walked toward Patrick. He didn't walk fast. He didn't walk with his hands visible or his posture aggressive, or any of the theatrical signals that lesser men use to announce their intentions. He walked the way he always walked, unhurried, contained, each step carrying the specific gravity of a man who had never once in his adult life needed to prove anything to anyone in a room. Patrick watched him come. To his credit, he didn't move. He stood his ground with the composed stillness of a man who believed composed stillness was armor. He even managed a measured half-smile as Robert stopped in front of him. "I was beginning to think you'd stay in that booth all evening," Patrick said. "I needed to finish my coffee," Robert said. "A beat." "The girls come with me," Patrick said. The pleasantness had thinned now, stretched over something harder underneath. "Whatever they've told you, they're troubled children with a habit of—" "Lola," Robert said, without raising his voice. Patrick stopped. "The one in burgundy," Robert continued. "Her name is Lola. The one in yellow is Lily. Lily is left-handed. Lola watches doors." He held Patrick's gaze without effort. "You've been with these children for weeks, and you have not once used either of their names. Not once." He tilted his head slightly. "Their father would know their names." Patrick's jaw moved once. Then the half-smile returned, rebuilt from different materials this time. "Harder ones. You have no idea," he said quietly, "what you are stepping into." "Show me," Robert said. Patrick looked past him toward the cafe entrance and gave a single small nod. The door opened. The 2 men from outside came in. They were large, professionally so, the kind of large that came from specific training rather than casual accumulation. Gray coats, close-cropped hair, the flat, attentive eyes of men who were paid to respond rather than think. They moved through the cafe entrance with practiced efficiency, positioning themselves to Robert's left and right, cutting off angles. The cafe had gone fully silent now. Petra stood frozen behind the counter, a cloth in her hand, not breathing. Robert stood between the 3 men and did not look at either of the ones flanking him. He kept his eyes on Patrick. "Last chance," Patrick said. "Walk away. I won't make this a problem for you." "I know you won't," Robert said. He moved, not toward Patrick. Toward the man on his left, the closer one, half a step nearer than his partner, and the movement was so sudden and so economical that the man had no framework for responding to it before it was already over. Robert's left hand caught the man's collar, redirected his momentum as he lunged forward, and introduced his face to the edge of the booth divider with a crack that silenced the last remaining ambient noise in the room. The man dropped. The second one was already moving. Faster than his partner, better trained, coming in low. He caught Robert across the ribs with a shoulder-legitimate impact, solid, and drove him back 2 steps into a table. Cups shattered. Coffee spread across the floor in a dark bloom. Robert absorbed the impact and used the table behind him as a brace. He caught the man's right wrist as it came up, turned it at an angle the joint was not designed to accommodate, and applied pressure with the calm precision of someone performing a technical task. The sound the man made was brief, and then he was on the floor beside his partner, cradling his arm, the fight entirely gone from him. 4 seconds, maybe 5. Robert straightened his jacket. He turned to Patrick. Patrick had not run. Robert had half expected him to, some men did, when the calculation reversed itself, but Patrick stood exactly where he had been standing. His composure rebuilt into something cold and stripped of pretense now, the performance of reasonableness entirely abandoned. What remained underneath it was harder and more honest, and Robert found he preferred it. "You understand what you've done," Patrick said. "I've had a long day," Robert said. "I'd like to finish my coffee, so I'm going to ask you to leave. And I'm going to ask you to leave without those 2 girls. And I'm going to ask you not to come back to this cafe. And if I don't..." Robert looked at him for a long moment. "Patrick," he said, and the name landed strangely. The first time Robert had used it, and something flickered in Patrick's eyes at hearing it. The recognition that this man knew more than he should. "I know what you're planning. I know what those girls are worth to your network, and I know the Thursday timeline, and I know about the blue warehouse by the water." He kept his voice entirely conversational. "And now you know that I know. So when you're deciding whether to come back here, I want you to factor that into your thinking." The blood had drained from Patrick's face, slowly, visibly. He looked at Robert with eyes that were recalculating at considerable speed not just who this man was, but what the situation had become, how badly his intelligence had failed him, how thoroughly and catastrophically he had miscalculated the booth by the window. He looked once toward the girls. Lily met his gaze without flinching. Patrick buttoned his coat and left. Robert watched him go, watched him pass through the door, into the rain, disappearing into the gray afternoon without looking back. Then he turned and walked back to the booth. Both girls were exactly where he'd left them. Lily sat straight, chin up, her sister's hand still in hers. Lola was watching him with those quiet, careful eyes. Robert sat down. He picked up his coffee cup. Empty. He set it back down, looked at it for a moment, and then looked at the 2 girls. "Are you hungry?" he said. Lily stared at him. Then, for the first time since she had run through the door of the cafe soaking wet and terrified, she laughed. Petra brought food without being asked. 2 plates of pasta, a basket of bread, 2 glasses of orange juice. She set them down without making eye contact with Robert, which was her customary approach. Except this time there was something different in it, a softness around her mouth, a deliberateness to the way she arranged the plates in front of the girls. She straightened up, glanced at Lily and Lola once, and then walked back to the counter without a word. Robert watched the girls eat. He had ordered them to eat, more or less. Not in those exact words. He didn't say, "You need to eat," or "You must be hungry," with the cloying insistence of someone performing care. He had said, simply, after Lily's brief, exhausted laugh had faded back into the reality of the situation, "Food first, then talking." And they had not argued. They ate like children who hadn't eaten properly in days. Focused, efficient, without the self-consciousness that hunger sometimes produces in people who have pride to manage. They were 9 years old, and they had been running, and they were starving, and they ate. Robert drank a second coffee that Petra had also brought without being asked. He watched the door. Patrick would not come back tonight. Robert was certain of this not because Patrick had been frightened off permanently, but because Patrick was a professional, and professionals, when a situation goes sideways, retreat to regroup rather than escalate blindly. He would be on his phone right now, identifying Robert, calculating. That process would take some hours, and when it completed, Patrick would understand exactly how badly he had miscalculated, and that understanding would make him either more cautious or more dangerous, probably both. The 2 men Robert had put on the floor had been collected by a third man Robert hadn't seen, always a third who'd appeared 10 minutes after Patrick left, gathered them quietly, and removed them from the cafe with the practiced discretion of someone experienced in the removal of problems. Petra had mopped the spilled coffee. 2 customers had left. The rest had resettled into the tentative normalcy that follows something they would all describe differently to different people for the rest of the week. Lola set her fork down first. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at Robert with the expression she had been wearing since she'd first clutched his arm, the measuring one, the one that took its time. "What happens now?" she said. Robert looked at her. "That depends," he said. "On what?" "On what you want to happen." Lola frowned slightly, as though the question had been answered incorrectly. "We want our mom back." "I know. So what happens now?" Robert set his cup down. He turned it once in its saucer, a small, slow rotation, and then looked at both of them. Lily had stopped eating. She was watching him with those direct, dark eyes, her fork resting against her plate, waiting. This was the moment he had been circling for the past hour. He had done what the moment required back there, stood up, dealt with Patrick's men, sent a message. That had been instinct and professional reflex, and something older and angrier that he hadn't fully examined yet. But this was different. This was the question on the other side of the action, the one that action left behind when the noise cleared. And now what, Robert? He could make calls. He knew people who handled situations involving missing persons. Not police, not official, but effective. He could transfer the girls somewhere safe, provide a location for their mother, and step back into his own life without crossing any further into this particular storm. It was the logical move. Clean, contained. He looked at Lily. She was not looking at him with hope, exactly. She was too careful for hope. What she was looking at him with was the particular attention of a child who has learned that adults say things and then do other things, and has developed, out of necessity, the ability to watch for which one is actually coming. He looked at Lola. Lola reached into the pocket of her burgundy jacket. She withdrew something small and placed it on the table between them, smoothing it flat with both hands. It was a photograph. Small, slightly creased, the kind printed from a phone rather than a studio. A woman standing in what appeared to be a kitchen, laughing at something off camera. Dark hair, pulled back. One hand raised mid-gesture. The laugh was full and unguarded, the laugh of someone who did not know they were being photographed and would have composed themselves differently if they had. "That's Mom," Lola said. "I kept it in my pocket." She paused. "I've been keeping it there since the second day, in case I forgot what she looked like when she's not scared." The cafe made its soft, ambient sounds around them. Robert looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he picked it up, looked at it more closely, and set it back down carefully on the table. "Can you save our mom too?" It was Lily who said it, quietly, without performance or pressure, simply the question, placed in the air between them. And then she sat and waited with the stillness of someone who has asked the most important question they know how to ask, and has enough dignity not to beg for the answer. Robert was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the warehouse by the water, the orange cranes, the blue sign. 4 men, maybe 5, Patrick regrouping somewhere in the city right now, burning through his phone, dangerous in the specific way that cornered professionals become dangerous. He thought about a girl he had known once, younger than these two, dark hair, a laugh not entirely unlike the one in the photograph, a trafficking ring that had moved faster than his intelligence and left him standing in a hospital corridor, being told that some things could not be undone. He thought about the fact that it was Thursday in 2 days. He looked at Lily. He looked at Lola. He picked up the photograph and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. "Finish your food," he said. Lily's breath released one long, quiet exhale, the first fully relaxed breath Robert had heard from her since she'd slid into the booth beside him. Lola reached across the table and touched the back of Robert's tattooed hand. Just once, lightly. The way you touch something you are grateful for but don't want to startle. Robert looked at her hand on his, then at the rain against the glass. He reached for his coffee. He had 2 days and a photograph, and the memory of someone he hadn't saved. This time would be different. Robert made 3 phone calls. He made them from the back room of a laundry business, 4 streets from the cafe, a place he owned through 2 layers of paperwork that led nowhere useful if you followed them, which several people had tried. The room smelled of hot linen and detergent, and the particular closeness of a space that was small and functional, and asked no questions. The girls sat on a bench against the wall. Lola had fallen asleep within 10 minutes of sitting down, tipping sideways until her head rested against her sister's shoulder, with the absolute surrender of a child whose body had simply overruled every other consideration. Lily sat straight, one hand resting on her sister's arm, watching Robert pace and talk with the focused attention she brought to everything. He didn't speak loudly. He never did on calls that mattered. The first call lasted 90 seconds. The second, 4 minutes. The third, 11 long enough that Lily's eyelids had begun to drift before he finished, snapping back each time with the determination of someone who had decided sleeping was not currently permitted. He ended the third call and stood for a moment looking at his phone. Then he looked at the girls. Lola breathing softly, completely gone. Lily fighting it with everything she had left, which was considerably less than she believed. "Sleep," he said. "I'm not tired," Lily said. "You've been awake for how long?" A pause. "Since yesterday." "Sleep," he said again, and something in his voice, not gentleness exactly, but the absence of its opposite seemed to settle the argument. Lily's shoulders dropped half an inch. She leaned back against the wall, kept her hand on her sister's arm, and within 3 minutes her eyes had closed and stayed that way. Robert sat in the single chair across from them. He looked at the two sleeping girls' identical faces, gone soft and unguarded, the fear temporarily vacated, just children now. Just 9 years old and 3/4, and he felt something move through him that he did not immediately have a name for. He thought about what his contact had told him on the third call. Patrick's operation was not small. This was the first and most significant piece of intelligence, the one that recalibrated everything else. Robert had walked into the cafe situation, expecting a single, predatory man running a local collection scheme. Ugly, dangerous, but bounded. Manageable. What his contact described was a network. Patrick was a regional coordinator for a trafficking organization that operated across 4 countries, moving primarily through port cities. The water access made logistics cleaner, borders softer, cargo easier to misrepresent. They had been operating for 6 years. They had people inside 2 shipping companies, and at least 1 border checkpoint that his contact knew of. Possibly more. They moved children under humanitarian cover. Fake NGO documentation. Transit papers that would pass a standard inspection. The kind of infrastructure that required money and time and connections to build, and had been built carefully by people who understood that patience was an investment. Patrick had recruited the twins' father into a debt situation that was almost certainly engineered from the beginning. The debt was real, the failing business was real, but Patrick had accelerated it, deepened it, waited until the man was desperate enough to borrow from a source he shouldn't have touched. When the debt became unrecoverable, the pivot to the family had been planned in advance. The father's disappearance, Robert now believed with cold certainty, was not voluntary. Thursday's crossing was already documented. 2 transit papers, already stamped, already in the system. The blue warehouse by the water was a staging point. The network used it for 24 to 48 hours before transfer. Never longer clean turnover. Minimal exposure. Tonight was Wednesday. Robert leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, and looked at his hands. The tattoos across his knuckles. The ring on his right hand that had belonged to someone else once. He turned it once, slowly, and then stopped turning it. He thought about the photograph in his jacket pocket. He thought about a woman in a kitchen, laughing at something off camera, unaware. He thought about Thursday. 2 of his men arrived at 11. Gregor first broad, quiet 15 years with Robert. The kind of loyalty that had been tested enough times to be worth something. Then Felix, younger, sharper in the specific way that youth combined with competence produced before it had been weathered into something steadier. Both of them took in the sleeping girls on the bench without comment, which Robert appreciated. He briefed them in low, clipped sentences. The warehouse, the layout as best he understood it. 4 confirmed men, possibly 5, 1 stationed outside the room where the woman was held. Patrick would have called for reinforcements after the cafe. Robert factored this in, added 2 to the estimate, planned for 6. "What's the objective?" Gregor asked. "The woman, alive and unharmed. Everything else is secondary." Gregor nodded. "Patrick?" Felix asked. Robert was quiet for a moment. "Patrick answers for what he's built. Tonight we take the warehouse and the woman. The rest of it," he stopped. "There are others in there, not just her. The network has been running for 6 years. I want documentation. Anything that names people, routes, contacts. We take it all." Felix raised an eyebrow. "That's evidence. Police territory." "Then the police will receive it," Robert said. Anonymously. Felix absorbed this without further comment. Gregor showed no reaction at all, which was his customary response to most things. A small sound from the bench. All 3 men turned. Lola had shifted in her sleep, her braid falling across her face. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something between a name and a question, and then settled again, her sister's hand still on her arm, neither of them waking. The 3 men looked at the sleeping girls for a moment. Nobody said anything. Robert turned back to his men. "We move at 2, he said. "Get what you need." The men moved quietly to the far end of the room. Robert remained where he was, looking at the girls for a long moment. He thought about the laundry room, the bench. 2 children who had run through a storm and chosen a Mafia boss and fallen asleep in a room that smelled of clean linen, trusting entirely that the man across from them would still be there when they woke up. He reached into his jacket pocket, touched the edge of the photograph, put it back. He stood, rolled his sleeves to the forearm, and began to prepare. They moved at 2. The city at this hour was a different animal, quieter, stripped of its daytime performance, showing the bones underneath. Wet streets reflecting amber streetlight. The occasional car moving through intersections without stopping. The harbor district was darker than the rest. The kind of dark that accumulates in places where industry has replaced residents, and nobody lives close enough to complain about the lights being left off. Robert rode in the front seat. Gregor drove. Felix sat behind them, checking equipment with the quiet efficiency of a man for whom this was simply work. The girls were not with them. Robert had arranged this before he'd woken them, a woman named Dora, who had worked adjacent to his organization for years in the capacity of someone who knew how to be invisible and trustworthy simultaneously, had arrived at the laundry room at 1:30. She was perhaps 60, small, with the kind of face that communicated safety to children instinctively. Robert had introduced her simply as a friend. Lily had looked at him. "You're going tonight," she said. Not a question. Yes. To get her. Yes. She had studied his face for a long moment with those dark, exhausted eyes. Then she had nodded once, the serious nod, the one that meant she had processed and accepted and was not going to spend energy on what she couldn't control. Lola had said nothing. She had looked at Robert with her quiet, measuring gaze, and then she had reached into the pocket of her burgundy jacket and held something out to him. The photograph. He looked at it. "You keep it. You keep it," she said. "So you know exactly who you're looking for." He had taken it, placed it in his jacket pocket, against his chest, where it had been before. Now the warehouse appeared through the rain-blurred windshield, a large, low building pressed against the harbor's edge. The orange cranes rising behind it against the dark sky like enormous sleeping animals. The blue sign above the entrance was partially collapsed, letters missing, the remaining ones spelling nothing coherent. Gregor cut the lights 2 blocks out and rolled to a stop. Robert studied the building. One man outside the main entrance. Visible light in 2 ground-floor windows on the east side. A second figure moving along the south wall patrol. Irregular timing, approximately 4-minute intervals. Loading dock on the west side, door closed but not padlocked, which meant it was secured from inside. "East windows are occupied," Felix said from behind him. "That's where they're comfortable, which means the holding room is somewhere they're not." "North side," Robert said. "No lights. They keep her somewhere without windows." Gregor looked at him. "Loading dock," Robert said. 2 minutes after the patrol passes south, they moved. The patrol passed. Robert counted. At 90 seconds, he was already at the loading dock door. Gregor behind him, Felix circling wide to manage the exterior guard quietly. The dock door was steel, older. The interior latch, the simple kind that responded to lateral pressure, applied at the correct angle. Robert applied it. The door gave. Inside smelled of salt water and diesel, and something Robert recognized and did not name. They moved through the loading area in single file, close to the wall, into the interior. The building was larger inside than its exterior suggested, high ceilings lost in darkness above, concrete floor. Crates stacked along the walls in configurations that created corridors within corridors. Voices from the east side, muffled, 2 men talking without urgency. A television somewhere, low volume. Robert kept moving north. The corridor narrowed. A single bare bulb hung above a door at the far end, metal, newer than everything around it. A padlock through the handle. He stopped. He listened. Nothing from behind the door. But the lock was closed, and the bulb above it was the only maintained light in this section of the building, which meant someone had made a decision about this specific door. He looked at Gregor. Gregor produced a bolt cutter from the bag across his shoulder, applied it once cleanly, and stepped back. Robert opened the door. The room was small. Concrete walls, a cot against the far side, a bucket, a bottle of water on the floor. Cold, colder than the rest of the building. No heat. The kind of cold that accumulated over days. A woman sat on the cot. She had dark hair, pulled back. The same hair from the photograph, though the photograph had not captured the hollowness that had settled beneath her eyes in the time since it was taken. She was dressed in the same clothes she'd clearly been wearing for days. Her wrists had marks on them not currently bound, but the marks remained. She looked up when the door opened and her entire body tensed, the way a body tenses when it has learned that doors opening do not produce good things. She saw Robert. She saw Gregor. She pulled back against the wall. "My name is Robert Stoica," he said quietly. He kept his voice level, unhurried, taking up no more space than necessary. "Your daughters are safe." Lily and Lola. They're with someone I trust. They're warm and they've eaten, and they are waiting for you. The woman stared at him. Lily has her braid out, he continued, because he understood that specifics were the only currency that worked in this moment, the only thing that could reach through the wall that fear built around a person. Lola kept your photograph in her jacket pocket. She gave it to me tonight, so I'd know exactly who to look for. Something broke open in the woman's face. Not slowly, all at once, the way a window gives when the pressure on both sides finally equalizes the control she had maintained over however many days she had been in this room, simply releasing, completely, in a single moment that she had no mechanism left to prevent. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. Robert crossed the room and crouched in front of her so they were level. He did not touch her, did not presume. He simply put himself at her height and waited. "Can you walk?" he said. She nodded, both hands still over her mouth, tears running without any apparent awareness on her part. "Then let's go," he said. The east side erupted at the same moment they reached the loading dock. Patrick had sent reinforcements. Robert had planned for this, and still the timing was tighter than he wanted. 3 men coming through the main entrance as Felix handled the exterior guard. Voices raised, the sudden violent noise of a situation that had been quiet and then wasn't. Gregor moved the woman behind a stack of crates and stayed with her. Robert went toward the noise. What followed was not clean or cinematic. It was fast and dark, and happened in the corridors between crates, where the only light came from the east windows, and nobody was performing for anyone. Robert moved through it, with the particular focus that arrived in him in these moments. Everything narrowed, everything simplified, the entire world reduced to the next 3 seconds, and then the 3 after that. Patrick was not among the men inside. Robert noted this without surprise. Patrick was a coordinator. Coordinators did not enter buildings when the buildings had gone wrong. They managed from distance and assessed damage afterward. The 3 men were professionals, but they were reacting rather than initiating, and in confined spaces against a man who had chosen the engagement on his own terms, reacting was a significant disadvantage. It was over in 4 minutes. Robert had a cut across his left forearm. A knife, one of the men, close quarters that he registered and set aside for later. He returned to the loading dock. The woman was on her feet, Gregor beside her. She looked at Robert, at the cut on his arm. Something crossed her face, a complicated thing, gratitude and guilt, and the particular anguish of someone who understands that other people have bled on their behalf. "Don't," Robert said. She closed her mouth. He picked up the bag Felix had set by the dock door: documentation, drives, paper records, everything they'd swept from the east room while the building was in motion. 6 years of network, routes, names, contacts, border arrangements. He handed it to Felix. "You know where it goes," he said. Felix nodded and disappeared into the dark. Robert looked at the woman. She was shaking cold and shock and the aftermath of days in that room, but she was standing, and her chin was up, and her eyes were clear in the way eyes go clear when something you have been surviving toward has finally arrived. "Lily and Lola," she said. Her voice was raw. "Are they really?" "They're fine," Robert said. "They found me themselves. Walked into a cafe in a rainstorm and decided I was the safest option available." The woman made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "That sounds exactly like them," she whispered. Robert almost smiled. He turned toward the harbor dock and began to walk. "Come on," he said. "Let's take you home." Dora's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that asked no questions of its residents, which was why Robert had used it before and why he used it now. Warm, small, smelling of tea and old books, with 2 lamps that produced the kind of light that felt like relief after the harbor dark. The girls were awake. Robert hadn't expected this. It was past 3 in the morning, and he had left 2 exhausted children in the care of a woman with a talent for settling people down. But when the door opened, both of them were sitting at the braid. Small kitchen table with cups of something warm, upright, awake, waiting with the focused patience of 2 people who had made a decision not to sleep until they had a reason to. Lola saw her mother first. She didn't make a sound. She simply stood up from the table and crossed the room, and walked into her mother's arms with the directness of someone returning to the place they had been trying to get back to for a very long time. Her mother caught her and held her, and the sound she made low, broken. Her face pressed into her daughter's hair. Was the kind of sound that doesn't have a name, because language developed for situations less acute than this one. Lily hadn't moved from the table. Robert noticed this. He stayed near the door, Gregor already gone. Dora having quietly relocated herself to the kitchen with the practiced discretion of someone who understood that some rooms needed clearing. Lily sat at the table with both hands around her cup and looked at her mother holding her sister, and the expression on her face was not what Robert expected. It was not pure relief. It was something more complicated. The face of a child processing the arrival of something she had kept herself from fully believing in, because hope in certain conditions is a dangerous thing to carry, and she had been carrying it very carefully for a long time. Her mother looked up. "Lily," she said, "just the name. The way you say a name when the name itself is the entire sentence." Lily's composure broke cleanly and completely. She was out of the chair and across the room in a motion that had nothing of her usual deliberateness in it. Pure and uncalculated, entirely a child. A 9-year-old who had held herself together through a storm, and a cafe, and a Mafia boss's back room, and a night of waiting, and had reached the exact limit of what 9-year-olds should ever be asked to hold. Her mother gathered both of them in, one arm around each, pulling them against her chest, and the three of them stayed that way for a long time, in the lamplight of a room that smelled of tea and old books, while rain tapped softly against the window. Robert watched from the doorway. He looked at his hands. The cut on his left forearm had been wrapped in the car with the basic efficiency of a man accustomed to managing his own injuries. His knuckles were dark, with bruising at the edges of his tattoos. He turned his right hand over once, looked at it, turned it back. The photograph was still in his jacket pocket. He reached in and took it out and looked at it. The woman in the kitchen, laughing, unaware. He looked from it to the woman across the room, face buried in her daughter's hair, and set the photograph down on the small table by the door. He didn't need it anymore. He turned to leave. "Mr. Stoica." He stopped. The woman was looking at him over her daughter's heads. Her face was wet, her voice raw, her eyes carrying the particular clarity of someone who has been through enough that pretense has become an unaffordable luxury. "I don't know how to." She stopped, started again. "There aren't words for what you don't need words," Robert said. "I need you to know," she said, and there was something firm underneath the rawness now, something that had survived days in a concrete room intact. "I need you to know that I understand what this cost, that I know men like you don't do things like this, and that my daughters trusted you with something I can't ever repay, and you—" Her voice broke briefly. She held it. "You didn't let them down." Robert stood in the doorway for a moment. "They made it easy," he said, which was not entirely true, but was not entirely false either. Lola turned in her mother's arms and looked at him. "You kept the photograph," she said. "I left it on the table." "You kept it the whole time, though?" Robert looked at her. "Yes," she nodded slowly, satisfied, as though this confirmed something she had already known. Lily lifted her face from her mother's shoulder. Her eyes were red, her braid completely undone now, hair loose around her face. She looked at Robert with those direct, exhausted eyes that had looked at the most feared man in the city and found something in him worth trusting. "I told you," she said. Robert looked at her. "In the cafe," she said. "I told you. The men who are kind when nobody's watching." She held his gaze. "I told you maybe the opposite was also true." Robert was quiet. "You were right," he said. Lily held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned back into her mother's arms and held on. Robert stood in the doorway and looked at the three of them. The lamp, the rain, the tea going cold on the table, the photograph by the door, and felt something move through him that he had stopped expecting to feel. Not absolution. He was not a man who believed in clean endings, or earned redemption, or the settling of accounts between what he had done in his life and what one night in a harbor warehouse could offset. But something that had not been there before. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the door. Dora appeared from the kitchen, caught his eye, gave a small nod that communicated both, "I have this," and go without requiring either of them to speak. Robert opened the door. "Mr. Stoica," Lily's voice. He looked back. She was watching him from her mother's arms, chin resting on her mother's shoulder, eyes serious. "Come back sometime," she said. "We'll be at the cafe. Saturday. Mom likes the table by the heater." Robert looked at her, then at the mother, who met his gaze over her daughter's head with an expression he didn't try to interpret. He looked back at Lily. "I'll be in my booth," he said. He closed the door quietly behind him. The cafe was the same. This was one of the things Robert had always valued about it. Its absolute refusal to change, regardless of what happened outside its walls. The same amber light from the pendant above the counter. The same smell of espresso and warm bread. The same particular quality of quiet that existed here on Saturday afternoons. different from the weekday quiet, slower, as though the whole room had collectively exhaled. Robert arrived at his usual time. Petra was behind the counter. She looked up when he came in, and something passed across her face, not the careful neutrality she usually maintained, but something warmer and more complicated. The expression of a woman who had mopped, spilled coffee off her floor, and watched a man put 2 men down without raising his voice, and brought pasta to 2 soaked little girls, and had been thinking about all of it for several days. She said nothing. She started his coffee. Robert settled into the booth by the window, removed his jacket, draped it beside him. The rain today was lighter than it had been, a fine, persistent mist, rather than the sideways assault of the previous week. The city softened by it rather than battered. He looked at his hands on the table. The bruising had faded at the knuckle edges. The cut on his left forearm was sealed, already reducing to a thin line that would join the other thin lines he carried. His ring caught the light when he turned his hand, the ring that had belonged to someone else, someone he had failed a long time ago, in a way that had quietly shaped everything that came after. He thought about that, about whether anything had shifted in that particular wait. He thought it had. Not resolved, he did not believe in resolution, did not trust it. It was the story people told themselves when they needed the past to behave neatly, but shifted, redistributed, carried differently. Petra set the coffee down. She started to move away and then stopped. "Those girls?" she said, without looking directly at him. "They're all right?" Robert looked up at her. "Yes," he said. Petra nodded once, moved away. Robert lifted the cup. The door opened at 2:30. He heard them before he saw them. The particular sound of children moving through a public space, the soft collision of energy and restraint that happened when children were trying to behave, and finding it only partially achievable. He did not look up immediately. He looked out at the mist on the glass, at the blurred shapes of the street beyond, and waited. They appeared at the edge of his peripheral vision. The mother, first dark hair down today, wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, something in the way she held herself different from the woman who had been sitting on a cot in a concrete room 4 nights ago, though the difference was still fragile, still finding its edges. She was speaking to the girls in a low voice as they came through the door, a hand on each of their shoulders briefly, before they saw him and she lost them. Lily arrived at the booth first, yellow jacket replaced by a green one, braid intact and tidy. She slid into the seat across from Robert with the familiarity of someone returning to a place they have decided belongs partly to them now. "You're here," she said. "I said I would be." "People say things," she said, with the equanimity of someone who had learned this lesson earlier than most people should. "I know," Robert said. "I'm here." Lola appeared beside him. She did not slide into the booth. She stood at the edge of it and looked at him, and then, with the deliberateness that characterized everything she did, she reached out and tucked her small hand briefly into his tattooed one. Not a handshake. Not a hug. Simply contact certain, brief, complete. Then she climbed into the booth beside Lily. The mother stopped at the table's edge. She looked at Robert. He looked at her. There was a long moment between them that contained a number of things neither of them had the vocabulary for in the middle of a cafe on a Saturday afternoon. She seemed to understand this. She nodded once, small, but carrying weight, and he returned it. She sat down across from him, beside Lily. Petra appeared with a menu, which she offered to the mother, and a children's menu, which she offered to the girls, and another small black coffee, which she set in front of Robert without him asking. Robert looked at the table. 4 cups, 4 people. He could not remember the last time his booth had held more than one. "The heater is closer at the counter table," he said to the mother. She glanced toward it. "Yes, we usually." "You can sit here," he said. "I don't mind." She looked at him. A small, careful smile arrived on her face, the first one he had seen from her that was not tangled up with grief or relief or shock. Just a smile. "Thank you," she said. Lily was looking at him over the menu with the expression he had learned to recognize as her thinking face, the one that meant she was assembling something. "Robert," she said, testing the name, having decided somewhere between the laundry room and this moment that the formality of Mr. Stoica was no longer the correct instrument for whatever they were now. He looked at her. "Are you always here on Saturdays?" "Always," he said. She nodded slowly, as though filing this away under something permanent. Across the cafe, the regulars sat in their usual places, 2 men near the window with newspapers, an older woman with a book. The counter seat where the old man sometimes sat, the one whose coffee Robert had paid for without announcing it. Nobody looked at the booth. Or rather they did, but differently. Not the quick, averted glance of people who had identified something to avoid, something more considered, more respectful. Not of the Mafia boss, of the man in the booth by the window who had 4 cups on his table on a Saturday afternoon and was listening to a 9-year-old explain at length why the children's menu was inadequate. Robert listened. Outside, the mist pressed softly against the glass. He reached for his coffee. For a long time, he had believed that this booth, this window, this particular quality of Saturday afternoon quiet, was the thing he was protecting when he sat here. His aloneness, his separateness from the kind of entanglements that cost more than they returned. He looked at Lily talking, at Lola, watching the room with her careful eyes, already noticing everything, at their mother with both hands around her cup, the fragile new steadiness of someone rebuilding themselves one ordinary moment at a time. He picked up his coffee. He thought that perhaps he had been wrong about what he was protecting. Or perhaps it had simply taken the right storm, and 2 soaked little girls with undone braids, to show him what the booth by the window was actually for. He took a sip. Outside, the rain continued its soft conversation with the glass. Inside, for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, Robert Stoica was not alone, and he found, sitting with that unfamiliar fact in the warm amber light of a Saturday afternoon, that he did not mind it at all. Thanks for sticking with this story until the very end. You're the reason these stories feel alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to read your thoughts and connect with you in the comments.
А все равно, как бы, сути дела не меняет, как бы зарплата плюс-минус везде там, больше, чуть меньше. Как бы, и, наверное, это все, вот эта общая ситуация, наверное, у многих привела, во-первых, сфера развлечений, да, всякие там кредиты и так далее, настолько загоняют каждого в задницу человека. И об этом на самом деле никто так-то не говорит. Какое количество сейчас, допустим, даже в те же сложные времена такие, когда вот сейчас идет там специальная военная операция, да, где люди вообще умирают, в принципе, за какую-то сумму денег. То есть какая мотивация, то есть у мужика идти типа на войну, воевать и как бы заработать денег? Потому что он вот в обычной жизни не понимает, типа, как реализовать себя. Он понимает, что он может пойти работать на какую-то работу, где зарплаты его все равно не будет хватать. Как бы тут тоже двойственная сторона. Хорошо, когда она есть, плохо, когда ее нету. Да, вот это маленькая даже зарплаты. Но морально-то ты все равно подавлен. Ты понимаешь, да, я там пойду туда, но как бы смысла мне этого не принесет большого. Да, у меня там станет, если я вообще не работаю и буду работать за 50 тысяч, хорошо, что они у меня есть, я смогу там покушать себе купить, но это же дизмораль. Когда ты заходишь в интернет и видишь, как люди там в Дубае летают, покупают себе огромное количество автомобилей какие-то, много всего такого, что ты за эту зарплату себе никогда в жизни позволить не сможешь. И как человеку оставаться морально типа сильным? Что ему нужно делать? Наверное, во-первых, это, наверное, все от семьи исходит, да? То есть, какая семья у тебя, как она построена. Если ты один живешь, это сложно, да, ты будешь сам себя, но у тебя, опять-таки, возможно, родители, если есть, которые друзья поддержат тебя в какой-то момент, хотя бы просто отвлекут тебя от этих мыслей. А если у тебя, к примеру, там семья, жена, к примеру, да, есть дети, то тут, наверное, поддержка только от них исходит какая-то. Вот. Чтобы не упиваться в своих мыслях о том, что какая нынче сложная жизнь. И, наверное, других-то вариантов, в принципе-то, и нету. Какие вот еще варианты, в принципе, изменить, поменять свою жизнь настолько, чтобы она была, казалась тебе удачной, да? реализованным себя в жизни, в чем-то. Вот как проявляется на самом деле у нас реализованность? Наверное, у 90% случаев это финансовое благополучие, финансовая независимость. Это, наверное, одно из таких ключевых моментов, когда человек, наверное, считает себя реализованным, да, в этой жизни. То есть, как добиться этого? То есть, с учетом того, что даже возьмем нашу страну, да, сколько миллионов людей здесь живет, как каждому добиться этого результата? Непонятно. И с каждым годом просто ситуация становится все хуже и хуже. Все дорожает, люди зарабатывают либо столько же. Ну, даже если они зарабатывают столько же, на самом деле этого все уже недостаточно. К чему это все приведет на самом деле? В оконцове, наверное, мир погрязнет в большую депрессию в какую-то. Какие-то войны, возможно, или еще что-то еще больше глобальных таких вещей, которые не приведут ни к чему хорошему на самом деле. Поддержка каждого человека именно для того, чтобы он держался, наверное, морально, заключается в том, что, ну, наверное, дом, в который ты приходишь, должен быть крепостью твоей, да, что это единственное должно быть место, где ты будешь чувствовать себя под защитой. Для этого было придумано, наверное, своя пещера изначально, потом свои какие-то чумы, палатки различные, да, потом все это превратилось. На данный момент это у нас дома, квартиры, в которые мы приходим и должны ощущать себя в безопасности, чтобы можно быть немного морально расслабленным с учетом того, что ты выходишь каждый день на работу, на улицу, и все равно давление вот это вот, оно все равно присутствует. Когда ты заходишь в магазин, видишь цены эти, да, и так далее, не можешь себе что-то там приобрести, позволить на ежедневной основе, это откладывает большой, наверное, отпечаток. Не, наверное, а точно. И поэтому, когда возвращаясь домой, ты чувствуешь, вот хотя бы есть типа уголок того места, куда ты можешь прийти. Уголок на самом деле человеку много тоже не надо. Можно хотеть большего, но на самом деле человеку одному много не надо. Да? Ему нужно спальное место, спокойное место, где можно подумать. Ну, это когда ты один, к примеру, да? Когда у тебя есть семья, к примеру, ты приходишь домой, опять-таки, тут хотя бы, да, поговорить о каких-то вещах. Просто об отрешенных вещах, наверное. И, возможно, при этих же условиях у тебя и появляется какая-то дополнительная мотивация для реализации себя. А когда у тебя нету ничего, вот это уже становится проблемой. И это у многих на самом деле. Что значит не иметь ничего? Тут, наверное, самое главное, дизмораль у человека еще возникает при том, что это уже, наверное, где-то в глубине души даже она возникает при даже хорошей финансовой подушке такой, которая у тебя есть, хороших финансовых деньгах, да, то есть, но нету вот внутреннего ощущения, к примеру, дружбы, семьи, любви и так далее. Это уже отдельно на самом деле разговор, потому что мы, вот, к примеру, можем взять, как сейчас вот Новстрой, если кто-то смотрит, насколько тяжело обладать такими финансами и не иметь, по сути, ничего. Ни друзей, ничего не иметь. Так главное это получается для бедных главное деньги, для богатых главное какое-то внутреннее ощущение нужности, не из-за денег. Вот такой вот. И эта борьба какая-то такая и вот эти два слоя общества, богатые и бедные, они друг друга не понимают. На самом деле из-за этого, возможно. Потому что богатый человек, он уже не смотрит на деньги, он не считает эти деньги. Ему важно внутреннее вот это вот ощущение того, что он нужен без них даже. Это как Тони Старку сказали: а кто ты без костюма? На вот это я филантроп, тудым-сюдым, он сказал, да? Так и человеку, у которого много денег, ты задашь вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Ну, что ты представляешь себе без денег? Вот и это, наверное, возможно, таких людей богатых, как вот, например, там Мелстрой, задав ему этот вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Он на него ответить-то и не сможет. Обратная сторона людей бедных, да, вот если мы посмотрим, человеку